On the night before my 18th birthday, I was sitting on a plastic chair in the emergency waiting room of St. Catherine's Hospital in Chicago, wearing a thin paper bracelet on my wrist that said voluntary psychiatric hold, and I had no idea how I got there. That is not entirely true. I knew exactly how I got there. What I did not understand yet was why. Let me back up. My name is Maya. I am 29 years old now, and I am telling you this story because I spent too many years carrying it in silence. And silence is the thing that almost finished what my mother started. So, here it is, all of it. My grandfather, Thomas Renner, built a small empire from a single hardware store in Evanston, Illinois. He was not a flashy man. He drove a 12-year-old pickup truck and wore the same brand of flannel shirts he had been buying since 1987. But over 40 years, that one store became 18 stores across 3 states. And when he passed away from a heart attack during my sophomore year of high school, his estate was worth just under $4 million. Half went to a handful of charities he had supported for decades. The other half, $2 million, was placed in a trust with my name on it, to be released on my 18th birthday. No conditions attached. My grandfather did not believe in making children earn what he wanted to give them. He believed in making it clean, making it direct, and making it impossible to take away. Almost impossible. My mother found out about the trust the same week Grandpa's will was filed with the probate court. I was 16 at the time and did not know the money existed. My grandfather had never mentioned it. I think he believed I would find out in the right way, at the right time, from the attorney who handled his estate. A man named Edwin Cole, who had been my grandfather's friend for 30 years. My mother found out before I did, and she told my stepfather before she told me. My mother had married Frank Heller when I was 12. My biological father had left when I was 4, and I have almost no memories of him beyond a vague sense of warmth and the smell of cedar wood. My mother's version of him shifted over the years depending on her mood. When she was happy, he was simply a man who was not ready to be a father. When she was not happy, he was every terrible thing she could think of. I stopped asking about him somewhere around age 10, because the answers always cost me something. Frank was nothing like the ghost version of my father. Frank was loud where my father was apparently quiet. Frank was generous with his opinions and frugal with everything else. He made a living flipping properties, which means he spent money to make money, which means there were long stretches of months where there was very little of either. The house we lived in was always half a renovation away from being finished. I grew up stepping over drywall dust and breathing paint fumes and learning to say nothing about the exposed wiring in the hallway bathroom that my mother said would be fixed by spring, every spring, for 6 years. I was not miserable. I want to be careful about that. There were good years, or at least decent ones. My mother made extraordinary lasagna. She laughed loudly at her own jokes. She taught me to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Sunday morning, and that afternoon we ate ice cream on the hood of her car, and she told me I was going to do something that mattered with my life. I believed her then. The trouble came slowly, the way most trouble does, in increments small enough that you keep adjusting and calling it normal. Frank started managing my schedule when I was 14. Nothing aggressive, just suggestions that calcified into rules. No sleepovers because he worried about insurance liability if something happened to my friends in our unfinished house. No after-school job because my grades needed my full attention. No boyfriend because I was too young, and then because the specific boy was wrong, and then because boys in general were a distraction from my future. He always framed it as investment in my future. I did not have the vocabulary then to name what it actually was. By 16, I was inside a very small life. School, home, church on Sundays because Frank had found religion around the same time my grandfather died, which my 16-year-old self noted with a suspicion I could not articulate. My closest friend, a girl named Danny, had started avoiding me because every plan we made fell apart at the last minute when Frank decided I was needed at home. When my mother told me about the trust, it was a Thursday evening in March, 7 months before my birthday. She sat me down at the kitchen table, which she only did for serious conversations, and she slid a piece of paper across to me. I recognized my grandfather's name in the header and the number in the body of the document and nothing else, because my hands were shaking too hard to hold the paper steady. $2 million, she said, releasing on your birthday in October. I looked at her face, trying to read it. She was smiling. It was the right shape for a smile, but the warmth was somewhere else, pointed somewhere I could not see. We are going to need to talk about how to handle this responsibly, she said. 18 is very young to manage that kind of money. Frank appeared in the doorway. He was holding a mug and looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Assessing, like a contractor measuring a wall he plans to knock down. We want to make sure you are protected, he said. That was the first time I felt it. The specific cold of knowing something is wrong but not yet what. Over the following weeks, things shifted in ways I could not point to directly. My mother started asking me questions about my mental health in a way she never had before. Were my moods okay? Was I sleeping? Had I been feeling anxious? I thought she was being attentive. I answered honestly. Yes, I had been anxious. High school was hard. My grandfather was gone. Of course I was anxious. She made an appointment with a therapist. Not a therapist I chose. A man named Dr. Garrett, who worked out of a beige office suite in a building I had never been to, who asked me questions with a flat expression and wrote things on a yellow legal pad that I could not read. After 3 sessions, he told my mother that I was showing signs of generalized anxiety and what he called distorted attachment patterns. I did not know what that meant. I asked my mother, and she said it meant I sometimes had trouble trusting people and that they were going to help me with that. Something had started that I did not understand, and it was already 2 steps ahead of me. 4 months before my birthday, Frank sat me down and asked me to sign a document. He explained it was a financial power of attorney, standard for minors with significant assets coming due. He explained Edwin Cole had recommended it. He explained I did not need to read the whole thing because it was mostly boilerplate. He slid a pen across the table the same way my mother had slid the paper about the trust, and for one moment I reached for it. I did not sign. I cannot tell you exactly why. There was no single thought that stopped my hand. It was more like a sound at the edge of hearing, a frequency I did not have a name for, that made me pull my fingers back and say I wanted to read it first. Frank's face did not change. That was the most frightening thing. Not anger, not pressure. Just a pause, and then a smile, and then he said, of course, take your time. I took the document to my room. I read it 3 times. I did not have a lawyer's brain, but I had been paying attention in school, and what I understood was this. The document did not give Frank temporary access to my trust fund. It gave him full and permanent control until I was 25, with discretionary authority to make investments on my behalf. My behalf was doing a lot of work in a lot of clauses that seemed designed to replace me with Frank in every meaningful financial sense. I hid the document under my mattress. I told my mother I had lost it. She said she would get another copy. I said okay. The next morning I woke up and the document was gone from under my mattress. Looking back, I should have called Edwin Cole immediately. I had his business card in my desk drawer, a soft cream card with his name in dark green letters that my grandfather had given me at some point, saying in his quiet way that Mr. Cole was a good man to know. But I was 16 and I did not fully understand what was happening, and the people in my house were the adults, and adults controlled the narrative by virtue of being adults. So I said nothing and watched and waited and told myself I was misreading things. Then came October. The morning of the 9th. My birthday was the following Tuesday. My mother woke me gently and said there was a routine checkup scheduled. I had missed a physical in the spring, she said. She wanted to get it done before the craziness of the birthday week. I was half asleep. I did not question it. She drove me to a building I did not recognize. Not my regular pediatrician's office. A facility called Lakewood Behavioral Health, which I would not have known if I had not read the small bronze sign beside the door while my mother was getting something from the back seat. By the time I read it fully and turned around, Frank was standing behind me. There is nothing to worry about, he said. Just some paperwork. Inside was a reception desk and a woman who was expecting us. My mother sat beside me and held my hand while a man who introduced himself as a coordinator walked us through a form. I noticed the form was already partially filled out. My name, my date of birth, my mother's name as primary guardian. Under reason for visit, someone had typed acute emotional dysregulation, potential risk to self. I have never expressed a risk to myself in my life. I looked at my mother. She was studying the far wall. I stood up. I said I needed to use the restroom. The coordinator smiled and pointed. First door on the left. I walked to the first door on the left, which was indeed a restroom, locked myself inside, sat on the cold tile, and for 10 minutes I did nothing but breathe and try to understand what was happening to me. I had no phone. My mother had asked me to leave it at home because she did not want me distracted during my appointment. I should have thought more about that at the time. I had not. When I came out, my mother and Frank were gone. I went to the reception desk and said my family had been here. They just stepped out. The receptionist looked at me with an expression I had seen before on the face of airport customer service agents in movies, professionally neutral, telegraphing that she knew something she was not going to tell me. Your mother completed intake paperwork on your behalf, she said. You are scheduled for an evaluation this afternoon. I want to leave, I said. You are welcome to speak with our patient advocate, she said. I want to leave right now, I said. A security guard appeared from a side door. He was tall, older, maybe 65, with a white beard kept close and careful and eyes that moved quickly across the room before settling on me. He was not wearing the building's security uniform. He wore a dark blue jacket with a patch on the sleeve that said Eastgate Security, which was not the name on the building's sign. There had been a shift change, I found out later. The regular guard had called in sick. Walter Graham had been sent as a substitute from the contracted security company that staffed several facilities in the area. He had been at his post for 40 minutes and had already noted, as he told me later with the directness of a man who has spent decades reading rooms, that something about the intake this morning did not sit right. He looked at me and said quietly, "Why don't you come with me?" Not toward a room, toward the exit. "My name is Maya Renner," I said, loud enough for the receptionist to hear, because I had read enough to know that saying your name out loud in a place like this mattered. I am 17 years old. I came here with my mother and stepfather. I did not sign any paperwork. I do not consent to any evaluation. I want to call my grandfather's attorney, Edwin Cole, whose number I do not have with me but who can be reached through Renner and Associates in Evanston. I do not know where that came from. I had not planned it. It came out of whatever part of a person survives on instinct when everything else is failing. The receptionist's fingers paused above her keyboard. Walter Graham had stopped moving. The facility coordinator appeared from a back hallway. I think there may have been some miscommunication, he said. Walter said, quietly, and with a certainty that suggested he was not asking, "She wants to call her attorney." "You have a phone." There was a long moment. Then the coordinator handed me his desk phone. I called information and asked for Edwin Cole, attorney, Evanston, Illinois. I was transferred. An assistant answered. I said my name and that I needed to speak with Mr. Cole immediately, that it was an emergency, that it was about the Renner estate. There was silence on the line. Then the assistant said, "Please hold." Her voice changed in a way I noticed but could not interpret. Edwin Cole came on the line in under a minute. When I finished explaining what had happened, the address I was at, the form with my name already typed in, my mother leaving without me, he was quiet for a long moment. He said, "Maya, I am going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. Do you feel safe where you are right now?" Walter Graham was standing 4 feet away with his arms crossed, watching the corridor with an expression that suggested nothing in this hallway was going to reach me without going through him first. I said yes. Edwin said, "Do not sign anything. Do not go anywhere with anyone. I am on my way." He arrived 45 minutes later. In that 45 minutes, Walter Graham found me a chair away from the reception desk, brought me a cup of water from the break room, and sat nearby in complete silence, except for the moment when he looked over and said, "You are going to be okay. I have seen scared, and I have seen lying, and you are only one of those things." I asked him how he knew. He said he had a granddaughter about my age, and the look I had walking in was the look of someone being walked toward something, not someone choosing where they were going. Edwin Cole was smaller than I expected for someone whose name had occupied such a large space in my life. Mid-70s, narrow-shouldered, wearing a coat that was still damp from the October drizzle, he walked in and looked at me and for a moment said nothing. Then he said, "You have your grandfather's eyes." I had been told this before by people who knew Thomas Renner. It always landed somewhere tender. He spoke with the facility director for 17 minutes. I sat with Walter and listened to the rain against the front windows and tried to understand why my hands had stopped shaking. When Edwin came back out, he had a folder under his arm. He said we needed to talk, and not here. Walter stood up when I did. He was off his shift in 10 minutes, but he said he would wait until he saw me walk out the door with someone who was there for the right reasons. I thanked him. He handed me a business card that said Walter Graham, Security, with a phone number. He said if I ever needed anything, and he meant that broadly, I should call. I have that card in my wallet still. Edwin drove me to a coffee shop 4 blocks from his office. He ordered 2 cups of coffee he did not ask me if I wanted and a plate of pastries and set everything down and looked at me with the careful, steady attention of a man who had been practicing difficult conversations for 50 years. Your grandfather knew, Edwin said. I set my coffee cup down. He knew your mother was not going to manage this the way he hoped. He had watched her for years, Maya. He loved her because she was his son's wife and she was your mother. But he was not naive about what she was capable of when money was involved. He made the trust ironclad for a reason. It releases directly to you, not to a guardian, not to a parent, not to an attorney. Directly to you, the moment you turn 18. Your mother cannot access it. Your stepfather cannot access it. No power of attorney can redirect it unless you sign one as an adult, over the age of 18, with independent legal counsel present. I thought about the document Frank had slid across the table, the pen he had held out. That is why she needed me to sign before my birthday, I said. Edwin nodded. The involuntary psychiatric hold was their second plan. If a facility could document that you were a danger to yourself, they could petition for extended guardianship past 18. It would have delayed your access to the trust and given Frank time to challenge the terms in court. With Dr. Garrett's notes in the file, they had been building a paper record for months. I stared at the pastry in front of me. Edwin reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored. My name on the front in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards going back as far as I could remember. Your grandfather left this for you, Edwin said. He asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I had hoped the time would be a happier occasion. I held the envelope for a long time without opening it. Outside the coffee shop window, people were walking past with umbrellas and grocery bags and the ordinary business of their lives, and I was sitting in a booth holding a letter from a dead man who had somehow seen all of this coming and tried to protect me from the other side of it. I opened the letter. My grandfather wrote the way he talked. Short sentences. No wasted words. The letter was 1 page. He told me he was proud of me in the specific way he had always expressed pride, not in achievements but in character, in the small moments he had noticed over the years, the way I returned shopping carts, the way I listened when people talked, the way I never stopped asking questions, even when the answers scared me. He told me the money was not what mattered. He told me to find Edwin if I ever felt lost, because Edwin would tell me the truth. Then he wrote one more thing. He wrote, "There are people in your life who will tell you that love means accepting what you are given. That is not true. Love is not a cage. Anything that locks you in is not love. You deserve the open door." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I did not cry in the coffee shop, but I thought about crying for a long time. Edwin drove me to a hotel that night. My mother and Frank were, as we would discover, at home in our house, which they apparently believed would remain their house once they had secured control of the trust. Edwin had already been in contact with a family law attorney, a woman named Deborah Park who specialized in cases involving financial exploitation of minors, and with the probate court that had oversight of the Renner estate. The next morning, Deborah Park filed an emergency motion. The morning after that, my mother called my cell phone 6 times. I let all 6 calls go to voicemail. The messages moved from breezy to concerned to careful in a way that suggested she had consulted someone before leaving them. The 7th time she called, I answered. She said she could explain everything. She said the facility had been a misunderstanding. She said Frank had overstepped and she was handling it. I said I needed her to hear something. She said, of course. I said that I loved her. That I had spent 17 years trying to be worth loving back, trying to be small enough and quiet enough and easy enough that she would look at me the way she looked at things she valued. I said I knew now that the problem had never been my size or my volume or how easy I was. I said I was not calling to fight or to punish her. I was calling to tell her that what she had done had a name and a legal consequence, and that I was choosing not to let it define the rest of my life. She started to say something. I said I had to go. I have not spoken to her since. The legal process took 8 months. Deborah Park was precise and relentless in the way that the best attorneys are, not dramatic, just thorough, following every thread to its end without letting go. Dr. Garrett's notes were subpoenaed. His professional relationship with Frank Heller was uncovered. They had been in the same church small group for 2 years. The intake form at Lakewood Behavioral Health had been pre-completed by my mother at a private meeting with the facility director 3 weeks before my supposed appointment, which was not a routine physical, had never been a routine physical, and had been scheduled without my knowledge or consent. Frank was charged with financial fraud and conspiracy related to the power of attorney document, which had been filed with a notary before I ever saw it, prepared in anticipation of my signature. My mother was charged with custodial fraud and negligent supervision. Her attorney negotiated. She avoided prison time. Frank did not. He received a 14-month sentence and was required to pay restitution that came nowhere close to covering what he had tried to take. My mother lost legal guardianship over me 3 days before my 18th birthday, which was an administrative detail that changed nothing practical but felt significant anyway. On my actual birthday, I sat in Edwin Cole's office and signed the documents that released $2 million into an account in my name. Edwin had brought a small chocolate cake from the bakery down the street. His assistant lit 2 candles, a 1 and an 8, and they both sang in the careful way of people who are not confident singers but are committed to the gesture. I made a wish. I did not wish for anything to do with money. Walter Graham came to the birthday dinner that Edwin organized at a restaurant a week later. He had heard about the case through the security contracting company, which had been interviewed as part of the investigation since he was a witness to my statements at the facility. Edwin had tracked him down and invited him, and Walter had driven 40 minutes from his house in Waukegan wearing a jacket and tie that suggested he took the occasion seriously. We sat next to each other at the long table, and he told me about his granddaughter, who was applying to nursing programs. He told me he had spent 30 years in building security and that most of what the job required was paying attention, reading a room, noticing the thing that was off. I told him that what he had done in those 45 minutes had changed the direction of everything. He shook his head and said he had only pointed me toward a phone. I had done the rest. He said, "You knew your grandfather's lawyer's name. You said it loud enough for the room to hear. You had been paying attention your whole life, Maya. You were ready for that moment. I just made sure the door stayed open." I thought about the letter in my grandfather's handwriting. The open door. I told Walter about it. He listened without interrupting, which is a rarer quality than it should be. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather sounds like a man who knew exactly what he was leaving behind." "Not the money," I said. He nodded. "Not the money." I moved into an apartment in Evanston 6 weeks later. Edwin helped me find it. 3 blocks from his office, an old building with high ceilings and windows that faced east. I started community college in January and transferred to a 4-year university the following fall. I majored in family law. You can probably guess why. 2 years after the case closed, I started working part-time with a nonprofit that provides legal advocacy for minors in financial exploitation situations. There are more of those situations than most people realize. Children with trusts, children with inheritances, children whose assets make them useful to the adults who are supposed to protect them. We help them navigate the gap between when the threat starts and when they can legally speak for themselves. I think about the version of me that signed that document Frank slid across the table. She was so close to existing. 3 more seconds and she would have. I think about my grandfather writing that letter and sealing it and trusting Edwin to deliver it at the right moment, knowing he would not be there to see it. I think about Walter Graham, off-shift security guard, showing up at the exact facility on the exact morning and standing in the exact right place long enough to notice something was off about a 17-year-old girl being walked toward a room she had not chosen. I do not believe in coincidences. I believe in a man who spent 40 years paying attention to the people around him and tried to protect the one he loved best in the only ways still available to him. I believe he did everything right. I believe it was enough. My mother lives in Phoenix now. I know this because Edwin's office receives legal correspondence from her attorney twice a year, part of an ongoing civil arrangement. I do not read the letters. Edwin reads them and tells me what I need to know and nothing more. I do not hate her. That would require a kind of sustained attention I choose to spend elsewhere. I have an apartment with east-facing windows and a coffee maker that takes up too much counter space, and a bookshelf that is currently one shelf short of holding everything I want it to hold. I have friends who show up when I ask them to, and sometimes when I do not. I have work that matters. And I have Edwin, who calls on Sundays to talk about nothing in particular for exactly as long as it takes. Last month I drove to Waukegan to have dinner with Walter and his granddaughter, who graduated from her nursing program in May. She has her grandfather's eyes, quick and careful, and she listens the same way he does, completely, like whatever you are saying is the only thing happening in the room. Walter is 71 now. He still works part-time because he says the stillness gets to him if he sits too long. At dinner, he told a story about a resident at one of the buildings he covers who had tried to smuggle a golden retriever into a no-pets unit by claiming it was a service animal for emotional support of his succulent plants. I laughed so hard my water came out of my nose, and Walter looked pleased in the quiet way he always looks pleased, like warmth is something he stores and gives out carefully so it never runs out. On the drive home, I thought about what it means to be saved. Not in the dramatic version. Not the movies where someone arrives running at the last possible second. The real version, which is smaller and stranger. A man pointing a 17-year-old girl toward a phone. A dead man leaving a letter with the right person to deliver at the right time. A girl who said her grandfather's lawyer's name out loud in a room full of strangers because somewhere beneath the fear she had been paying attention. My grandfather used to say that the most important thing you can give a person is the clear certainty that someone saw them clearly and chose to stay. I know what he meant now. I have been seen clearly. I have been chosen, not by the person I spent years hoping would choose me, but by the people who did not have to, who showed up not out of obligation but out of the particular human decision to not look away. That is the story. That is the whole thing. If you are watching this, and you know what it feels like to be treated like a means to an end by the people who were supposed to want nothing from you, I want you to hear this clearly. That is not love. That is not what you are owed, and it is not what you have to accept. Somewhere in your life there is an Edwin Cole with a letter someone left for you, and there is a Walter Graham standing in exactly the right place. The door is open. You just have to say your name loud enough for the room to hear it. Drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what it was that made you feel finally seen. I read everyone, and if this story meant something to you, share it. Because somewhere tonight there is a 17-year-old sitting in a waiting room she did not choose, and maybe the next thing she sees will be someone else's story telling her she is not alone, and maybe that will be enough to make her say her name.